So in this video, we're going to learn how to shatter stuff with MoGraph and rigid body dynamics. And what I'm going to use is this fantastic bust of Einstein. This I downloaded for free from the TurboSquid website, which is a fantastic site for getting all sorts of 3D models in all different formats. When you jump in here and search for any kind of 3D model, let me just reset this. You can look for free objects over on the left hand side. Once you've done a search for something, you can choose any of the paying models if you want to pay for some of the really high quality models on here, or you can look for the ones that are free. It's a great site for getting all sorts of stock 3D objects. So we've got Einstein here, and we're going to shatter him today using rigid body dynamics in MoGraph. So what I want to do is make a floor for a start so that I've got something for my pieces to land on. So let's create a floor, and let's make that a collider body. Okay, the other thing I want to do is just check that Einstein is sitting above the floor and not going through it, which he seems to be. So we want to break Einstein into a whole bunch of pieces. And we've got this really useful and fantastic tool under MoGraph, and it's called a Voronoi Fracture. There's two types of fractures in MoGraph. This fracture, the plain one, is not what we want. We want this Voronoi one. Now, what we're going to do is create that, and we're going to put Einstein in this MoGraph fracture object. Now, what you should see shortly is that the Voronoi will create this pattern of pieces. They're all multicolored. So it's basically broken my model into many pieces. Now, when you're dealing with shattering objects, you have to be very careful and think about how powerful your computer is. If you shatter this into 1,000 pieces, your computer, if it's not a particularly powerful one, will take a very long time trying to calculate all the pieces. And can really slow right down. So when you're starting out, just start with a few pieces, see how the performance of your computer is working, and then increase if you need to. Now, so to increase the number of pieces, as we can see, all these different colored chunks, these are quite large on my statue. I'd like some smaller chunks. So the way that we do that is go to our fracture. If we go to the sources tab, and in here is the point generator. The point generator is creating all the different shattered pieces inside our fracture. So if we select this point generator, down towards the bottom we'll have an amount, point amount. So I can change that. Let's put, say, 50 in there. Give it a few seconds to calculate that new shatter. And now we can see I've got a few more pieces. I've got a few more smaller pieces. I'm just going to stick with that for now. My computer's not particularly fast. I don't want to overload it with points, so we'll stick with 50 points. Now, there's all sorts of clever things you can do in there with how you generate your points, whether you use fields. There's an awful lot of complexity in there. I'm just going to stick with the basics for now, just to get us started. So this is shattered. I've got a collision tab on my floor. So what happens if we hit play? Nothing. Okay, we have no rigid body tag on the fracture currently. So let's go to our Voronoi Fracture, and let's go to our simulation tags and add a rigid body tag. Now I want to make sure in this tag, under my collisions menu, that all the individual elements, all the pieces of this MoGraph system, are all going to be treated as rigid bodies. So that seems to be okay there. Let's hit play and see what happens. And it falls to pieces. So it does that, but if we look at this, it looks like a hollow object, and it's broken just all into these shell pieces. This to me looks like it's made of stone or marble or something like that, so I'd like it to shatter into solid chunks. So what I can do is go to my Voronoi Fracture, and what I want to look for is the Object tab. And I want to optimize my object and close all the holes. This will treat it as if it's a solid object and create chunks. It might take a little bit of time to calculate that. So let's have a look at that now. Let's rewind and play. And there we go. It's breaking into chunks. It is very large, rough chunks. As I said, if I had a much more powerful computer, I could set more pieces into this. And you can add fractures to fractures, so you can make multiple levels of fracture to add complexity if you want to. I'm just going to leave this simple so that it actually plays on my computer. Now there's a couple of other options in here. I'm not going to go into those at the moment. I'm just going to stick with the basic shatter. Now that's great. It's all working, but what I would quite like is to hit this with something and then have it shatter. So at the moment it's just falling apart as soon as I hit play. So what I can do is in my dynamics tag for this Einstein bust is I can actually set the dynamics in the dynamics tab and to trigger on collision. So rather than trigger immediately, they're only going to start the dynamic simulation when it collides with something else. So let's set up something now and collide with this and see if we can blow it apart. So I'm just going to use a sphere for this. So let's create primitive sphere. And let's put this out in front. Now, in a previous video, I talked about setting an initial velocity for a rigid body object. So that's what I'm going to do with my sphere. So let's go to my sphere. Let's add a rigid body tag to it. And in this, we're going to set under the Dynamics tab, set a custom initial velocity in the blue axis, which is our z-axis. Let's set that at 5,000. I'm just going to make a guess here. Hit rewind. Now, so this should do nothing until the ball hits it. Brilliant. That's working. Great. Okay, let's just play it again. Now, the ball's just kind of bouncing off. It doesn't really look like it's got a lot of momentum or mass. I want this ball to really sort of crash through it, not just bounce off. So how do we do that? What we want to do is we want to add more mass to our ball. So more mass will give it more momentum, and using this velocity, it will carry that momentum through our collision much better. So let's select our sphere and go to its rigid body tag, and we've got a mass tab. So in the mass tab, it's just using a standard world density. What I'm going to do is use a custom density, and I'm going to set that to 10 times as dense, and let's see what happens there. Okay, it's a little bit harder collision. What if we set it to 100 times as dense? Now you can see it's really starting to smash through that statue, and it's giving the ball maintains a lot of momentum going through. I might even turn that even higher and really have this blasting through it. There we go. Okay, so that is setting up a Voronoi fracture. Now that seems to play reasonably quickly on my computer, so I might actually go back to this, go to the Sources tab, and just add a few more points to this, just so I can get a little bit more detail. It'll take a few seconds to calculate the new shatter structure. And let's have a look at that. That looks great. I'm pretty happy with that. I might just check my bounce settings for the fracture. So if I go to the rigid body tag and go to the collision tab, bounce is set fairly low, friction quite high. That's good. My sphere, let's have a quick look at the settings on that. And same on that, those are pretty standard. So I'm happy with that for now anyway. Now the other thing I would do if I was going to continue animating this is I'd probably cache that simulation. So I can select any one of the rigid body tags in the scene, go to the cache, and I can bake all. Now that'll take a couple of seconds to calculate. And what I should find now is I can scrub through the timeline and see the result of that simulation. So that's all working really well. Great, so that's just creating a simple shatter using a Voronoi fracture from the MoGraph menu.